Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. It's that time again. Let's start talking about where healers are standing thus far in a Mythic Plus environment and where I think they're also going to be going. At the moment, nobody is fully maxed out in eye level or anything along those lines. Nobody's fully geared, but you're seeing a lot of players getting up to like that 480 eye level, and the metas and possible god comps and things like that are starting to take hold. One of the more notable things on like the tank side has been how the tanks are starting to space themselves out and spread out quite a bit, with like Vengeance, Demon Hunter, and Prot Pally, of course, taking the lead. And from my personal experience and also seeing with other groups, there's been a lot more Prot Paladins that have been on the rise, giving Vengeance, Demon Hunter some competition. And those are always really important to note, because that also shapes a lot of how the healer tier list is going to be working. And again, these are based off of all the runs that have been completed, ranging from 20s to 29s. So even if you see Holy in D tier, please keep in mind that Holy Priests are completing 27s and higher, and probably could be as well on the side of Holy Priests. So like, don't panic. That being said, you're only seeing 2 healers thus far who have completed 29s, both Resto Druid and Disc Priest thus far, but you are seeing that the balance is a lot tighter than like an average tier list would actually let you believe. Even Shaman, most notably, has done 28s, and that was one of the healers that I felt the worst on personally from my experience, but they're still all completing really high level dungeons. And this is pretty straightforward, and this is pretty common at the start of each season, where the healing is just about who's able to survive and who's able to heal your allies. And Dragonflight, to its credit, has actually done a pretty good job of allowing every healer to heal these higher challenges that you had. I mean, Shadowlands didn't have as crazy high of HPS checks, so everyone could just kind of go in and do their thing. But now that you actually have real HPS checks in basically every dungeon in Dragonflight, yeah, every healer is capable of healing them to a certain extent and to a very, very high level, which is good to see. From here on out, though, is where the meta starts kind of pivoting, especially as we get closer to like 10.2.5. That was really where God Comp took over, or like 10.1.5 was where God Comp took over, was once everybody was geared or was able to gear alts incredibly rapidly because of the really high crest caps and the abundance of free gear that was available, all of those things. Not a bad thing, but it just led to a really heavy pivot towards Holy Paladin back then. Going forward, I really want to look at where tanks and where DPS are going. Most notably, Demonology Warlock, Fire Mage been stepping it up over what I was viewing as more common was with the Hunter. Obviously, of course, we're having the augmentation of Ochre coming in, and of course, we were seeing Havoc in abundance. But most notably, it's like these A and B tier DPS also play a really big role in determining who else gets kind of brought to the table. Because if Aug and if Havoc are super insane, well, you have a Poison Dispel, you've got a low kick, you've got Darkness utility, you've got Aug utility. Whether you have a Demon Hunter or a Prot Pally, you have shutdowns in abundance for your mobs. But a lot of healer balance in M+ is based off what else gets sort of brought to the table. Notably, Disc and Mistweaver are doing great right now, but they're not bringing battle reses, whereas, the Prot Paladin is. Whereas the Demonology Warlock, kind of technically is. It's not a great one, but it is. So there's that factor. Augmentation, of course, locks down the Bloodlust, so you don't have to worry about that as much. Especially as I've been going through my 27s and 28s on Tyrannical this week, I've really noticed how much more quickly we start getting into that one-shot range. And this, I think, is most notably where you're going to start seeing the divergence over the next month or two, for where healers are going to be starting to separate based on their ability to heal through all this crazy incoming damage. Most notably, through my experience playing with Disc, I feel like I kind of always need to be having my Mindbender available for every single big bursty event, otherwise we're going to fall behind. I had moments where I was like playing with Shadow Fiend, and if I ever didn't have my squid available and big damage comes out, I felt like I just didn't have an opportunity to be able to like top off and keep everybody safe through that really, really heavy pressure, especially if it happened really frequently. I think I had it on like the Time Waste boss on like 27 or 26 or something like that. And with how heavy the burst damage was, you just constantly needed to have your pet and play around it. Mistweaver, on the other hand, has had a lot of success into this season so far. the buff to bounce back, which is like passive damage reduction if you take a certain amount of your health and damage. I think it's like 12%. Diffuse, dampen are all really strong defensives. Fort Bruise, kind of whatever, but it's an extra defensive that can get utilized. Cocoon's really strong. And it comes down to like the healers that are able to bring really powerful externals really frequently to the table. Disc, Holy Pally, Mistweaver, Resto Druid all have strong defensives that they can be giving to others and are able to do it very, very frequently. But then the survivability of each of those specs is going to vary quite a bit. And this is where I find it super interesting to see which DPS are getting brought to the table, because the stouter of DPS that you have, the stronger they are to deal with the incoming damage, the bigger a role it also plays in dealing with the HPS checks for those healers. If you can have more immunes in your group, more damage reduction brought to your team, the less that your healer is going to have to be requiring omega high output, and the more it's going to be about using defensives and using immunities to be able to get past those mechanics and to be able to overcome a lot of them. Notably, having like pre-cloak out of like rogues was insanely helpful on a number of different boss fights, time-wise especially, because of how you're able to just straight immune the mechanic. We even had our hunter like pre-turtling things to like immune mechanics, and those make a really substantial difference. Prop Pally is able to bring like bop and spell warding, so being able to bypass certain mechanics by just getting rid of them in their entirety makes a really significant difference. I think at the moment we're still in this mode that any of these healers is able to do 27s, 28s, because they're able to just push enough healing through to make sure that you stay alive, and the timers are sort of like forgiving enough that you're able to get past it. I think this is a mistake from them not increasing mob health enough so that you're not meeting like DPS checks, or you're not failing dungeons when you have like 4 or 5 deaths or something along those lines. There's still a lot of those deaths that are happening in dungeons, and so that's why I think that this season is going to continue to push more towards the tankiest of healers that are going to be moving forward. Notably on that side, I think it's Mistweaver and Holy Pally at the moment that are the tankiest and the stoutest to survive that incoming damage, and I'm really interested to see how it shakes up, because I know a lot of people have been super downer on Holy Pally and its performance and its ability to be able to heal through the really high incoming damage that the dungeons are going to be having. And that's where I'm really curious to see how it's going to go, because otherwise, both Mistweaver and Holy Pally have the right to spell profile, but Paladin's bringing the bop, it's bringing the constant sacrifice, and it always has some kind of cooldown for another situation. And I don't think that healer damage in and of itself is as major of a factor as we have seen in previous seasons. And this is something I've said a number of different times, is that while it does matter and it's important for you to maximize, with how forgiving these dungeons have been, where you're able to just rack up a ton of deaths and still be able to complete the dungeon in time, it feels like it's more important just to make sure you're giving everything you can to keep your damage dealers alive. Notably, the easiest dungeon for the Tyrannical week at the time of this video was Blackrock Hold, where it's almost entirely about using immunities and shutdowns to be able to get past certain mechanics, or just to be able to dunk on the mobs before they can kill you. Having obviously like the immunities and damage reduction for like the final boss of Blackrock Hold makes a massive difference. But notably, Everbloom and Rise were the hardest dungeons so far in the Tyrannical week that we just experienced. Everbloom notably because you have this just back-to-back like chunker bosses, and like the third boss, the mage boss in Everbloom, which has just massively high burst damage, where people can get double ticked by cinder bolts within 0.3 seconds. You'll have one bolt and then another bolt hit somebody insanely quickly. And honestly, healer output's only going to go so far when health pools are, let's say, low relative to the damage that we're taking. Each of those bolts is going to hit somebody for like 40 or 50% of their life, and so you don't really have a lot of time to be able to push the health pool up before the next burst of damage happens. And that's where it becomes even more important for immunities, for damage reduction. And that's what I always want to make sure that I'm hammering home on it, is that those things make a tremendous, tremendous difference in a higher level key environment. And that is also what helps like shape and like pivot the meta. Waycrest, for example, is usually on the side of the easier dungeons, but it kind of all comes down to Soulbound Goliath, to the point that we even zoned out and were using PvP like anti-stun trinkets and just to be able to make sure players were getting out of the soul thorns easier. We were leaning on like Prop Pally bops sometimes, or leaning on my pain suppression sometimes to make sure that people would survive. But I even had times where I lost people through a full duration pain stuff and I'm spamming them because the damage is so high and because the HP of those mechanics like Soul Thorns have so much health that players have to burn through on top of it. So it's very, very interesting to see how the season is unfolding. Like I said, I do think that while healers are really close right now, the next month or so is where things are going to be spreading out. Definitely Mistweaver is going to be on that list for healers that's going to continue progressing upwards in value. I still personally plan to be playing a lot of Disc, but I will be gearing up my Monk, and I'm also going to be gearing up my Holy Pally, because I don't know if I'm in a position where I want to give up on it just yet, particularly because I still enjoy how it plays in dungeons, even though I know a lot of people really don't like, myself included, really don't like how it plays in raids right now. I do think that the kit that the Paladins bring is so valuable, and especially if Vengeance Demon Hunter stays in the equation as a super powerful tank and it remains competitive with Prot Paladin, I could very much see a situation where like Prot Pally could be flexing with like well, basically we play with any of the specs. It could be playing with any of the healers really easily, but I could definitely see like Holy Pally synergizing well with Vengeance Demon Hunter, but also Mistweaver working really, really well with Prot Paladin, because they'll be able to have that battle res from the Prot Pally to sort of fill in the gaps in a lot of cases. And the Prot Pally is the one who's bringing the extra damage reduction that can be given to allies for when the Mistweaver doesn't have as much single target output, or when they just don't have things like Cocoon available. We also are going to be really close to getting our Helm enchants, which is going to be coming up this week. And with those, it's going to be providing extra absorbs for all of the healers. So whenever you apply the Helm enchant, it's going to switch the buff depending upon what role that you're in. And so basically for all healers, their healing is creating additional absorb effects. And I think that's going to have a little bit of extra assistance for M+, but not a massive one, because it's going to be small amounts of increased effective health that players are going to be able to have on hand. It's called the Incandescent Essence. And with it, it's going to push the key level just a little bit higher for everybody. But notably, the damage dealers getting some strong buffs for themselves and continuing to gear is going to lead to M+ continuing to be able to be pushed further and further upwards. But this coming week is Fortified and Bolstering, so it'll be quite interesting to see how many keys are really done this week, because it's looking to be pretty rough for the affixes. Hope you like this meta check-in. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it, found it useful, and I'll catch y'all next time.